So what we want to look at now is how we can also get the details about whether the currently logged in user is following any of the attendees that are going to an activity. Now at the moment we know that we're following Tom, and these are the comments, and we don't want to add it to the comments, but what we do want to do is I'm just going to scroll down and find the activity with Tom, and what we want to see in here is a property of following equal to true when I'm retrieving the activities as Bob, and this is the token for Bob, and we would expect to see this being set to true for following, or not the isHost, but we would expect a property of following set to true when Bob gets the list of activities. So let's see how we're going to do this, and first of all we want to add the new property to our attendee DTO, because this is what we're sending back with our activities. So I'll add a prop, a boolean, and I'll just call it following. And what we're doing for our attendees to get this information populated in here is we're using a mapping profile. So if I take a look at the mapping profile we currently have for our attendees, what we want to do inside here is we want to get for the following property, what we want to see in here is whether or not the currently logged in user is following the user that we're returning as an attendee. But how do we do that? How do we know what the current user is inside our mapping profile? And this is where things get slightly trickier with AutoMapper, because we don't have a way inside here to inject our current user, or do we even want to inject our current user accessor inside here to attempt to go and get this and work out if the user is currently following that user? Well, there is an alternative way, and what we can do is create a custom value resolver and then use that inside our mapping profile, and that's the way that we'll do it here. And what we'll do inside our activities folder where we've got our mapping profile, I'm just going to create a new class and call it following resolver. And what we need to do here is derive from the iValue resolver, which we get from AutoMapper. And we need to tell it three things inside here: where we're mapping from, which is going to be our user activity. And when it comes to doing this sort of thing, we want to go to our mapping profile, and we're basically mapping from our user activity to our attendee DTO. So in fact, I'll just paste both of those in there. And this also requires a third parameter, and that's what we want the property to be set to, or the type that we want this property or this value resolver to return. And in this case it's going to be a boolean to set the following to either true or false. And what we also need to bring in here is AutoMapper. And because this is an interface, we then need to implement the interface. And we also need to bring in domain for the user activity. So inside the resolve methods, which is part of the iValue resolver interface, we get our source object, which is the user activity. We get the destination object, which is our attendee DTO, and then we get the type of the destination member, which is a boolean. And we also get the resolution context, which we don't actually need inside here, but it's available. And what we can do is inject the stuff we need into our following resolver. Now, because we're going to need to access the currently logged in user, and we need to check to see if the user is following this particular attendee, then what we'll need to do is generate a constructor and inject our data context in here. And we'll call it context, and we'll also inject our iUser accessor and call it user accessor. And we'll bring in our persistence and our application interfaces. And just like any other injection, we'll initialize the field from the parameter as well, and remove this dot and this dot as well. So what we want to do in here is get a reference to the currently logged in user. So we'll say var current user is equal to context.users.single or default async, and we'll need to bring in entity framework core, and we'll say x goes to x.username equal to user accessor dot get current username. And I spelled user terribly inside the current user, so let's adjust that. And what we can't do is make this an async method, because we can only return a boolean from this. We can't return a task of boolean. So what we want to do, if we want to use the single or default async method, then we need to get the result from this, which will bring it out of our task and populate the current user inside this variable. And then what we want to do is check to see if the current user is following the attendee here. So what we'll do, we'll say if current user.following.any, and we'll need to bring in system.link, and we'll say x goes to x.targetID is equal to the source.appUserID. And if that is the case, then we're going to return true. And if not, we're just going to return false. So pretty much the same as we were doing for our profile reader. We're just checking the followings for the current user to see if any of the followings match the user ID of the attendee, and if they do, then we're simply returning true, and if not, we return false. And what we can do then is make use of this value resolver, or this custom value resolver, inside our mapping profile. And what we'll do is we'll just add an additional for member, and we'll say d goes to d.following, and in the options we'll say o.mapFrom, and then we can just pass in our following resolver inside here, and that should solve this particular problem. And now when we get a list of our attendees, we should find that the following property is set to true for any users that the currently logged in user is following. So let's go test this, and we'll just get our list of activities again. And we get the 200 OK response, which is always a good start. And let's just scroll down to find the following property is set to false for Bob, which is fine because this is our currently logged in user. And if I just scroll down to where Tom is, and we're not following Jane, that's fine because that would be correct. And if we keep going down till we find an activity that Tom is going to, then we do find that we've got the following property set to true for Tom. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So this is as far as we're going with the API and this particular functionality. And what we'll do next is set this up in the client and deal with our following feature inside there.